We return now to section 1.3 of our psychology text on page 10. Describe the perspectives used to understand psychology today. Even in the 21st century, there isn't one single perspective that is used to explain all human behavior and mental processes. There are actually 7 modern perspectives, and we'll be talking later about Ken Wilber and his integral perspective, the idea that in fact you can take all these different views and try and understand them in some kind of holistic or synthetic way, eclectic way. There's a lot of different names for it, and Wilber is just one exemplar of a number of who have tried to do this. Let's begin with modern perspectives. 2 of psychology's modern perspectives are updated versions of psychoanalysis and behaviorism, while the others focus on people's goals, thought processes, social and cultural factors, biology, genetics. Psychodynamic perspective is our first. Freud's theory is still used by many professionals in therapy sessions. It's far less common today than it was a few decades ago, however, and even those who use his techniques modify for contemporary use. In the more modern psychodynamic perspective, the focus may still include the unconscious mind and its influence over conscious behavior and on early childhood experiences, but with less emphasis on sex and sexual motivations, and more emphasis on the development of the sense of self, social and interpersonal relationships, and the discovery of other motivations behind a person's behavior. Some modern psychodynamic practitioners have even begun to recommend that the link between neurobiology, that is to say the study of the brain and nervous systems, and psychodynamic concepts should be more fully explored. Next, we have the behavioral perspective. The behaviorist perspective also remains very influential. When its primary supporter, John B. Watson, moved on to greener pastures in the world of advertising, B.F. Skinner became the new leader of the field. Skinner not only continued research in classical conditioning, he also developed a theory of how voluntary behavior is learned called operant conditioning. You want to write that phrase down. In this theory, behavioral responses that are followed by pleasurable consequences are strengthened or reinforced. For example, a child who cries and is rewarded by getting their parents' attention will cry again in the future. Skinner's work is discussed in much greater depth in Chapter 6, Learning and Language Development. In addition to the psychodynamic and behavioral perspectives, 5 newer perspectives have developed within the last 50 years. The first is the humanist perspective. Often called the third force in psychology, the humanistic perspective was really a reaction to both psychoanalytic theory and behaviorism. If you were a psychologist in the early to mid-1900s, you were either a psychoanalyst or a behaviorist. There weren't any other major viewpoints to rival those two. In contrast to the psychoanalytic focus on sexual development and behaviorism's emphasis on external forces in guiding personality development, some professionals began to develop a perspective that would allow them to focus on people's ability to direct their own lives. Humanistic psychologists held the view that people have free will, the freedom to choose their own destiny, and that they strive for self-actualization, the achievement of one's full potential. 2 of the earliest and most famous founders of this view were Abraham Maslow, look at your dates, 1908 to 1970, and Carl Rogers, 1902 to 1987. Today, humanistic psychology continues to influence the study of personality, approaches to psychotherapy, and the field of positive psychology. We'll learn more about the humanistic perspectives in Chapter 14, Psychological Therapies and Treatments. Next, we have cognitive perspective. Cognitive psychology, which focuses on how people think, remember, store, use information, became a major force in the field in the 1960s. It was a new idea, and as the Gestalt psychologists had themselves supported the study of mental processes of learning. The development of computers, which just happened to make pretty good models of human thinking, and discoveries in biological psychology all stimulated an interest in studying the process of thought. The cognitive perspective, with its focus on memory, intelligence, perception, thought processes, problem solving, language learning, has become a major force in psychology. We will learn more about the cognitive perspective in Chapter 10, Cognition, Thinking, and Intelligence. Within the cognitive perspective, the relatively new field of cognitive neuroscience includes the study of the physical workings of the brain and nervous system when engaged in memory, thinking, and other cognitive processes. Cognitive neuroscientists use tools for imaging the structure and activity of the living brain, such as MRI or fMRI or PET. The continually developing field of brain imaging is important in the study of cognitive processes. Sociocultural perspective. Let's look at that one. Another modern
Staff, please make
perspective
sure that you bring
in
your
psychology
Chromebook to
is the
the staff meeting this
sociocultural
afternoon.
perspective,
Bring your Chromebook
which
to the staff
actually
meeting.
combines two areas of study. Social psychology, which is the study of groups, social roles, and rules of social actions, and relationships. And cultural psychology, which is the study of cultural norms. See your footnote there. Values and expectations. These two areas are related in that both are about the effect that people have on one another, either individually or in a larger group, such as culture. We will learn more about the sociocultural perspective in Chapter 7, Social Psychology. The sociocultural perspective is important because it reminds people that the way they and others behave or even think is influenced not only by whether they're alone with friends in a crowd or part of a group, but also by the social norms, fads, class differences, ethnic identity concerns of a particular culture in which they live. Cross-cultural research also fits within this perspective. In cross-cultural research, the contrasts and comparisons of a behavior or issue are studied in at least two or more cultures. This type of research can help illustrate the different influences of environment, culture, and training when compared to the influence of heredity, genetics, or the influence of genes on behavior. Let's go now to the psychological perspective. Biopsychology, or the study of the biology basis of behavior and mental processes, isn't really as new a perspective as one might think. Also known as physiological psychology, biological psychology, psychobiology, behavioral neuroscience. The biopsychological perspective is part of the larger field of neuroscience, the study of the physical structure, function, and development of the nervous system. Also, the previously discussed field of cognitive neuroscience often overlays with biopsychology. In the biopsychology perspective, human and non-human behavior is seen as a direct result of events in the body. Hormones, heredity, brain chemicals, tumors, diseases are some of the biological causes of behavior and mental events. Some of the topics researched by biopsychologists include sleep, emotions, aggression, sexual behavior, learning, memory, as well as disorders. For example, research suggests that human sexual orientation may be related to the developing baby's exposure in the womb to testosterone, especially in female babies, as well as the birth order of male children. The biopsychological perspective plays an even greater role in helping us understand the psychological phenomenon in other areas. There is clear evidence, for example, that genetics plays a role in the development of schizophrenia, a mental disorder involving delusions, false beliefs, hallucinations, false sensory impressions, and extremely distorted thinking, with recent research pointing to greater risk for those who inherit variants of a gene that plays a role in removing extra connections between neurons in the brain. And still another example, the progressive brain changes associated with Alzheimer's disease may begin more than 20 years prior to the onset of the clinical symptoms of dementia. To date, no cure exists, and treatments only temporarily assist with some cognitive and behavioral symptoms. Early identification and tracking of cognitive performance in individuals at risk for Alzheimer's disease is one vital component of researchers' efforts to identify potential interventions and treatments for this devastating disease. Let's finish with the evolutionary perspective. The evolutionary perspective focuses on the biological basis for universal mental characteristics that all humans share. It seeks to explain general mental strategies and traits, such as why we lie, how attractiveness influences mate selection, why fear of snakes is so common, or why people universally like music and dancing. This approach may also overlap with biopsychology and the sociocultural perspective. Now, for a look at all 7 of these modern perspectives and their major concepts, some of the major players in each, you're going to study the table 1.1 at the top of page 13. Okay? And again, as we say, you can take all of these perspectives and try to integrate them, and that probably makes the most sense as we study all of this. Let's go to 1.4 now. Explain how psychology developed as a scientific discipline. As you can probably tell, psychology's changed over time. It'll continue to change in the future as new technologies are developed, new theories are adopted, new discoveries are made. Lately, psychologists have performed significant research in several new or developing areas of psychology, including positive psychology. Psychologist Martin Seligman, a psychology professor at the University of Pennsylvania, is widely recognized as one of the founders of positive psychology, a perspective that recommends shifting the focus of psychology away from the negative, abuse, anxiety, depression, all the things that can go wrong, to a more positive perspective or focus on strengths, well-being, the pursuit of happiness. Positive psychologist research findings may help more people learn how to live happy and satisfying lives. You may have realized, as you read through the various perspectives, that no one perspective has all the answers. Some perspectives are more scientific, for example, behavioral cognitive, whereas others are based more in thinking about human behavior, obviously psychodynamic and humanistic. Some, like sociocultural, biopsychology, and evolutionary perspectives, are related to each other. Psychologists will often take an eclectic perspective, again I use the term integral, one that uses the bits and pieces of several perspectives that seem to best fit a particular situation. Let's now identify psychology's subfields as we finish at 1.5. Describe the important subfields of psychology. Why do psychologists perform research? Psychology is a large field, and the many professionals working within it have different training, different focuses, perhaps different goals from the typical psychologist. Yes? A psychologist has no medical training, but has a doctorate degree. Psychologists undergo intense academic training, learning about many different areas of psychology before choosing a specialization. Because the focus of their careers can vary so widely, psychologists often in many different vocational settings, right? And notice figure 1.2a will show the types of settings in which psychologists work. Remember, not all psychologists are trained to do counseling. Psychologists in the counseling specialization must also be licensed to practice in their states. In contrast, a psychiatrist has a medical degree, an MD or a DO, and is a medical doctor who has specialized in the diagnosis and treatment, including the prescription of medications of psychological disorders. A psychiatric social worker is trained in the area of social work and usually possesses a master's degree in that discipline. These professionals focus more on the environmental conditionings that can have an impact on mental disorders such as poverty, overcoming stress, and drug use. Let's finish now with 1.6. Discuss the value of research with human and non-human animals. Although many psychologists do participate in delivering therapy to people who need help, there's a nearly equal number of psychologists who do other tasks, researching, teaching, designing equipment, workplaces, and developing educational methods, for example. Also, not every psychologist is interested in the same area of human or non-human animal behavior, and most psychologists work in several different areas of interest, as shown in figure 1.2b. Subfields of psychology. Career options will be addressed in greater detail in Chapter 16, Applied Psychology and Psychology Careers. Those psychologists who do research have two types of research to consider: basic research versus applied research. Basic research is research for the sake of gaining scientific knowledge. For example, a researcher might want to know how many things a person can hold in memory at one time. The other form of research is applied research, which is research aimed at answering real-world practical problems. An applied researcher might take the information from the basic researcher's memory study and use it to develop a new study method for students. Some of the subfields in figure 1.2b tend to do more basic research, such as experimental and cognitive psychologists, whereas others may focus more on applied research, such as educational, school, industrial, organizational psychologists. Finally, 1.7. Describe the role psychology plays in improving both society and people's lives. There are many other areas of specialization. Psychology can also be used in fields such as health, sports performance, legal issues, business concerns, and even in the design of equipment, tools, and furniture. However, all psychologists have one important mission in common: to help others. Through research, counseling, treatment, teaching, psychologists aim to understand how the human mind works and use that understanding to improve people's lives. Research into tough social issues such as racial prejudice, systematic discrimination, and violence can lead to strategies for minimizing these issues in real communities. Research in the field of human factors psychology, which focuses on interactions between humans and machines, can lead to engineering improvements, such as designing airline cockpits that help pilots perform their jobs more accurately and efficiently. Psychologists' increasing understanding of developmental issues during childhood can strengthen school curriculums and guide parents' approaches to raising their children. And well-trained counselors and therapists can help people work through difficult personal issues and overcome the challenges of psychological disorders. These are only a few of the many ways in which psychology can improve the daily lives of people around them. All right, that's Module 1. We'll come back to Module 2, Research Methods and Ethics, here in a bit. Thank you.